Hello, everyone, and today it's a pleasure to be here with a great guitar player. Welcome to Chris Newman.
Hi,
Welcome, Chris.
it's delightful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and so Chris and I we met almost 20 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. It
2000, 2003.
Yeah, is that right? At Maryville,
That's
at
right.
the Stick Hoffman camp.
Hmm.
And I have very good memories of that camp, and in particular of your concert. I remember that you played when you played the concert in one evening. Yeah, you just played about everything, like Celtic music, something Celtic, something swing, something bluegrass. And so, yeah, maybe we can start talking about that. How come you are so accomplished in so many different styles of picking?
Well, I've always been interested in different types of guitar playing. I've always loved listening to guitar players, obviously, ever since I was very, very small. And I don't really mind what kind of guitar players they are. I mean, whether they're sort of really good, I mean, good classical players. I've never played classical guitar. It's not my instrument, but I love listening to good players. And swing jazz, of course, Django Reinhardt and Brelly Lagren and the Rosenbergs, and there's a whole load of those guys, and they're all fantastic. And then it wasn't that long ago, it's probably about 25, 30 years ago, I started listening to American players when I got interested in flat picking. And until then, I'd never really heard that style of playing. And in fact, and I'll tell you when it was a longer ago than that. It was 1978 at the Cambridge Folk Festival. It was the only time, I think, it was the only time that Tony Rice was ever in the UK. And he was at the Cambridge Festival that year with David Grisman and Bill Keith and a couple of others.
Well,
It was like an all. I think it was a David Grisman gig, but he'd invited all his friends, and it was just like a who's who of
yeah, the best, the
the
best one.
best,
Yeah.
the best. Darrell Anger on fiddle, I remember, and Todd Phillips
Wow.
on bass. Um, and I'd never heard anything like that ever. I mean, there are lots of bluegrass bands in the east of England, in the southeast of England, which is
Hmm.
where there are a lot of American bases historically, American Air Force bases. So therefore, I guess the whole bluegrass thing grew up in that part of the country. And I'd heard quite a few of those bands from, East Anglia, and thought, yes, they're pretty good, but it never really excited me. When I saw Tony Rice and David Grisman, of course, you know, my jaw was somewhere near my knee, and that was the only time I ever saw Tony Rice. And I've seen David Grisman a couple of times, but I mean, they're just terrific players. And from that moment on, I thought, I'd like to add that to my. Not that I can play as well as they can, but just to add that style to the mix. And then for the last 30 something years, I've been working with my partner, who's an Irish harp player.
Right.
So we got really very, very involved in Irish music in a very big way. Until then, I'd played a few Irish tunes. I mean, I'd bought a few records by the Chieftains and the Bothy Band and Planksty and the usual.
Yeah.
And like everything else, I put the records on and I just played along with them and learnt the tunes, because a lot of them are just fabulous tunes. They're just great melodies. So it was only really when I started working with Moira I had to really buckle down and learn the style properly, because there was a lot of things I was doing wrong, which I didn't even realise, of course, at the time. So that was a very steep learning curve for me initially. But so I suppose really I would really dislike having to play one thing all the time, whichever it is, whether it was jazz or Irish music or bluegrass. If I had to do just that one thing for the
Yeah.
rest of my, I think I'd tire of it fairly quickly. What I really enjoy is mixing things up. I don't mean not doing crossover stuff. It's not like it's not like swing and Irish, but if you're playing a swing tune, you play it in a swing way, and if you're playing an Irish tune, you play it in an Irish way. The two don't really meet. So, and that's the thing I've always found fascinating, and it's quite a challenge too, because you have to try to learn to play things stylistically correctly.
Right, different languages, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
completely
yeah,
different
completely
languages.
different. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean, the whole way, for example, of you know, and accompanying most Irish tunes, for example, on the guitar, you play in a very, very open way, you know, with lots of open strings and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Whereas, of course, if you're playing, you know, if you're playing T for two in A flat, there aren't too many open strings. So it's all closed position. And so the two styles are completely, they're diametrically opposite. But they're, you know, I enjoy doing both. Yeah.
yeah, that's good. And and then recently you've been working on classical music, right? And I
Well,
I'm a fan of your of this CD,
uh-huh.
okay,
Yes.
Breaking Bach, and it's just such a wonderful CD, and I never heard nothing like that before. And in fact, you are the first one playing on a yeah flat picking Bach, I guess, right?
I think so. Yes. I mean, I've always loved the music. I mean, who doesn't? I mean, they are just brilliant, wonderful tunes. Um, but as I said before, I'm not a classical player. I'm not a classical guitar player. I've never had a lesson in my life. I can't read. I never read dots or tablature. I mean, I do everything by ear.
You have big ears, right?
I have big ears. They're covered up. They're smartly covered up by the earphones at the moment. But yeah, I mean, so there are lots and lots of versions of these tunes. The Bach repertoire has been done by many classical guitar players over the years, from Segovia onwards. Really, I mean, they've all done it.
Yeah.
And what I'd done with this recording was to basically take the repertoire from monophonic instruments like a flute
Mm.
or a cello or a violin. Cellos and violins, of course, can play multiple parts, but they generally don't. It's single line.
Right.
Because as you know, when you're playing, if you're playing a melody with a flat pick on a guitar, you can really play one note. You can double stop, but generally speaking, it's a single note thing. So I was very keen to find the repertoire of things which have no added. There's no counterpoint. There's no bass lines. There's nothing like that, because Bach never wrote counterpoint or bass lines for example, the flute partita. It's just a single. It's just a single line, you know. And
Right.
so that's why I chose that particular music to do, because I didn't want to start putting in, you know, trying to put in extra bass notes or runs and stuff like that. I wanted to play it pretty, as far as I could, exactly what it was written, no less and no more. And so that was why. But doing it with a flat pick was interesting, because of course it's on a steel strum guitar as well. Because obviously classical guitar players have, you know, thumb and three fingers, and it's nylon strings, and I mean the sound is completely different, obviously. But I just did it. It was my lockdown project, actually, because when the pandemic struck, and of course
Oh,
our
really?
diaries, yeah, but our diaries, of course, just went from being fairly busy and having lots of, you know, so many gigs that month and so many gigs that month, and the tour here and the tour there. Of course, it also went just disappeared, and so all of a sudden, I'm sitting up here thinking, okay, so what do I do now? You know, what do I do for the next however long it's going to be? And of course, you know, nobody really knew. So that was why I just thought, well, it's a really good opportunity. So I'd come up here, I'd have my breakfast every morning, I'd come up here, which is the top of the house, into the studio, and I'd just sit with the computer, and I would just find the stuff, find the pieces, research them, get the recordings, then just basically very, very slowly have to learn them, because I can't read. So I had to do it all by ear and memory and everything, and it's quite a lot to do.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot. Look, I and of course I saw you playing some of those tunes, and there are several YouTube videos where yeah everybody can watch you playing those tunes. And what do you think? It's if somebody wants to try to learn one of the songs you have in that record, what which one do you think is not an easy one, because there are I mean there's no easy stuff there, but let's say that the one that yeah maybe to give it a try, you know, and
Certainly not track one, that's for sure. But I mean, I think, for example, what is it, the flute partita,
the
which are
flute.
four tracks. There's an Allemande, Correntia, Sarabande, and a Bourrée Anglaise, and
Yeah,
I mean, it's all in A minor. There's, you know, it's and they're tricky. I mean, well, it's all tricky. It's none of
Yeah,
it's easy. But I mean, the flute stuff is lovely because it's actually quite simple melodies. They do get a bit quick. He tends to like chucking in. You know, it starts off going da 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 da, then it's going da 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 da. You know, it's all this kind of stuff. But I mean, that would be the one I would think would probably be the best to have a go at. You know.
Yeah, good, good. Listen, changing subject here. I just have a few things that I would like to ask you.
Sure.
One is something that I hope it's interesting for everybody watching this. So one question is, what is your usually practice routine, or how has it changed over the years, I guess?
It
But
has. It has. Many years ago, I didn't have a practice regime at all. I just did. I just picked up the guitar and just played it. I didn't. I never gave any thought to actually what I was doing, which is not really recommended. It's not a great way to do things. It was about 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, I started teaching guitar at the University of Newcastle on the then new folk and traditional music degree course. And I'm still there now. We're going into the 22nd year. And so I started having to do things in a rather more formal way, obviously for the students. And a lot of the students, of course, are very good players. I mean, they've all passed auditions or they've gone through the grades, and some of them are very good players. And so I became aware quite rapidly that the deficiencies in my own playing, it was okay, but it was a little bit, it was a bit too much ad-libbed, if you know what I mean. It was a bit too make it up as you go along. So what I started to do then was develop a load of exercises, some of which I published in a book some years ago. But I do now. I mean, most days I do a lot of the things I was teaching at your recent camp in Valcade to the students in various sort of simple exercises. They're very simple to memorise. They're not so easy to do, but
right.
they're good exercises because people can remember. You know, it does. You can really remember them. It takes 5 minutes to learn the process, and then hopefully they can all take it home with them, and then over the next weeks and months they can just practice and just improve that technique. So I mean, I've got a load of those things. I've become very I very much approve of doing scales and arpeggios and stuff. I really do a lot of that when I'm just sitting up here on my own. Because it's the building blocks of everything, really. I mean, it was actually doing the Bach stuff taught me that more than anything, actually, because even though in a lot of traditional tunes in Irish jigs and reels, it's 90% of it is scales and arpeggios, really. But when you do something like the Bach stuff, and you realise there's so many patterns are repeated, and you know, if you know where all the different positions are to play any given arpeggio or scale, then it's a million times easier. Otherwise, what happens is every time you learn a new piece, you're having to, as we say, you're reinventing the wheel. You know, you're having to start again from scratch. Whereas if you actually have the basics correct, if you can do them, you know, nice clean arpeggios in any key, ditto scales, majors, minors, whatever you like. I mean, if you can do all that stuff, then really it makes playing anything easier. And I'm all for making life as easy as possible. I mean, one of these days I'm going to write The Lazy Person's Way to Play the Guitar. You know, it's just because why make it harder than it needs to be? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I guess connected to this is when you're playing, looks like, yes, you are, in your playing at least, I see that you're taking advantage of those arpeggios, for example. So are you following the chord progression as you improvise over a song, or over
Yeah, I mean, it's if I'm improvising over a swing tune, for example, I'll
yeah.
always be thinking of I always think of what the underlying chord is, and what the next chord is, and the one after that. So you're thinking ahead all the time.
Hmm.
And so therefore, if you're playing something, I don't know, let's say in A minor, so you're in fifth position and you're playing in A minor, you know the next chord's going to be an F. Well, You know, when you can go from fifth position down to first position, but on the other hand, if you can stay on fifth position and play an F out of the eighth fret of the fifth string, for example, so it means your hand isn't moving. You know, so you're still going. So you go from A minor to F. I mean, like that. You know, just by moving one or two fingers, without having to move your whole hand all the time. You know, I mean, I see so many. I mean, for a long time, ever since I was a kid, you see lots of rock and roll guitar players who, you know, and they've got their Les Paul or their Stratocaster or whatever, and they're sort of doing this all the time, you know, and it looks very impressive, but it's a very inefficient way to play it, you know. I mean, you know, I mean, it can look really good, but the fact is, if you're playing up and down the neck all the time, it's really not, you know, if you change your position all the time, you are, sooner or later, you will make a mistake. I mean, there's no question about it. Whereas if you actually hold, if you keep your positioning a lot tighter, then, you know, I'm not saying you won't make a mistake. We all make mistakes, obviously, but you're much less likely to make a mistake.
Yeah. And I noticed that maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like you pay a lot of attention. Maybe it's just what you said to the fingering. I mean, I mean, the fingering you choose to use this finger instead of that. It's not a random choice. It's just something
No.
that
Absolutely.
there is a reason for doing it.
It's absolutely not random. It's very highly thought out. I mean, I always try to use, wherever I am on the guitar, whichever position you're in, always try and use four fingers. You know, never use. I mean, there are so many. I've seen loads of great guitar players in America, bluegrass players. I mean, really good ones, playing great solos, and they never use the little. They never ever use the little finger. The only time they ever use the little finger is when they're playing like a big G chord, and they put it on the tree. But you see people, and they'll be playing sort of like mad, crazy stuff. But this is just up in the air, you know, just using these three. Now, obviously, because it's shorter and it's weaker, but you know that's the whole point of these exercises and all that kind of stuff. Is that you have to make your hands, you have to make all four fingers work independently. I mean, Django Reinhardt, who invented the whole swing thing, he only had the use of these two fingers. These two had been burnt in a fire, and so really he only played. He played just with two, which is all the more remarkable what he did. But the point is, you know, none of us, thankfully, touch wood, have ever been involved in fires, and we all have four fingers, so use them. You know, it's crazy not to. So I mean, my big mantra is that when I'm playing in position, I try never to go out of position by more than one fret. So wherever you are, if you're in sixth position, for example, this finger can go down to the fifth fret, or this one could go 6, 7, 8, 9, this one could go up to the 10th, but you should never go from, say, 9 to 11 or 9 to 12, or, you know, this kind of idea. So the whole point is you keep things very, very tight. You know, so you're not, again, so you're not doing this all the time, you're actually doing this and playing across.
And it's a lot of economy, I guess. Yeah, if you don't need to jump around so much, it's
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean, so you see so many people playing, you know, you're playing a tune like a bluegrass tune in G or something, and people want to hit the B on the 7th fret, and they'll go from the G on that finger, but on the 3rd fret, all the way up there on the 7th, which is difficult on the guitar because you're low down on the guitar, but the frets are widely spaced. I mean, up the top it's not so bad because the frets are much narrower, but down the bottom to hit that B, I mean that's actually quite difficult to do cleanly. So I mean, instead of going da da da, I would always lead off from the second string and go and play the G on the 2nd string, and then the A on the 1st string, and then the B on the 2nd. So do da da da, you know, instead of da da, that kind of thing, you know. But,
yeah. And again, you're using your pinky for that G note.
Absolutely, you have to, because if you don't use your pinky, you've got no chance. You know?
Right, and talking about this, by the way, I guess I don't know if you're famous for it, but anyway, I know you. I know that you never use a capo, and so yeah, even it doesn't matter what key you're supposed to play in. You don't like capos, right? Is there a particular reason for it? Sometimes we use the capo because we love the sound of the open strings, of course, because we have more open strings to play. But yeah, I know that you don't really use a capo most of the
Yeah, I do.
time.
I do occasionally. I do have one in my case, but I don't use it very often. I just found. I mean, for example, in America with the whole bluegrass thing, I find it fascinating that an enormous number of those tunes are in D or in A, simply because
Right.
they're fiddle keys.
Yeah.
So they're all fiddle keys. But your guitar players almost never play them in D or A. They always play them in C and G with the capo on the second fret. Now, personally, I hate C major. I just don't like C major. I think for me it's a horrible key because there is well, that's not quite true. It's I love C major if I'm playing the piano because I'm not a piano player, but I can just about hold my own in C major, very simple tunes because there are no black notes, of course, you know. But on the guitar, I really dislike C because the lowest note you can hit is the E, which is a major third. So, you know, do you really want to have a really low major third on that thing, or you know, you haven't got. I mean, the highest root note you have is the third fret on the fifth string, which is actually quite a high note, you know, relatively. Um,
Yes.
so therefore, I mean, I would very seldom. I mean, I can't ever remember having played tunes that are in D. I would never play them in C with a capo. I would always play them in D, and almost certainly play drop D, almost certainly, because then of course you have a fantastic bass fundamental. I mean, you've got this wonderful point right down the bottom, um, which just gives it a very full sound. You know, I mean, I remember that first time I was at Kaufman Camp when I met you in 2003. I remember being involved in, you know, a jam somewhere and people sitting around and playing tunes. And my problem, of course, was I didn't know very many bluegrass tunes at that stage. I mean, I knew maybe 3 or 4, and that was about it. But one of the ones I did know was Whiskey Before Breakfast, right? And I thought, and so they started playing. I thought, oh, I know this one, great, you know. So I was immediately down to D, and I'm playing it in D because everybody else is like another 10 guitar players, and they've all got capos on. They're all playing it in C. And it came to my turn to play the tune, and I played it, and they all kind of looked at me like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" You know, and it was just like, I said, "Well, it's in D. You know, it's a 4-chord tune in the key of D. I mean, it's a very simple tune." But it sort of started. I mean, now if you see people playing Whiskey Before Breakfast, a lot of guitar players are now doing the same thing. They're actually playing it in D because it does make more sense. I think, you know, and it's the same with A tunes. I mean, I just recorded, funnily enough, yesterday. I'm doing a recording for a friend of mine, and he's recorded Huckleberry Hornpipe. You know, the great Byron Berline tune. You know, it was he popularised it on the Country Gazette album, with Clarence White years and years and years ago. The wonderful. The album, my favourite ever title, "Don't Give Up Your Day Job," which is just a great title for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Huckleberry Hornpipe was the first track, and I just recorded it last night, and I had to play a solo, and so, you know, every other guitar player I've ever seen playing Huckleberry Hornpipe always puts a capo on and plays it in G, and I've actually just played it in A, and it's easy to play it in A. It's a lot of arpeggios in it, but on the other hand, you practice your arpeggios, you go da 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 da. You know, it's actually not difficult. You know, but it just sounds completely different from the normal way of playing it, which would be capo 2 out of G. You know, but that's just me. I mean,
Yeah.
I just like it. You know.
Uh, so maybe I have one more question for you today,
Sure.
Chris. Uh, can we talk a little bit about rhythm guitar?
Hmm.
Um, I know that when you play rhythm guitar, you take advantage of, I mean, all the different shapes that we have, right? And you don't usually stay on the same shape for a long time. So how did you develop that skill to be able to, yeah, to use all the fretboard even when you play rhythm guitar?
Hmm. Well, this all started really when I was about 17 years old. I met a chap called Disley, who was much older than me. I mean, he was when I was 17. He was probably about, oh, I don't know, he was probably about 45, maybe something like that. I mean, he was, which from where I'm standing now isn't very old at all. But when he was 17, you know, he was a much older guy, and he was a great. He was a big Django fan, and I used to go out and play with him. And I used to play rhythm guitar for him, and then occasionally he'd give me a solo, and he played rhythm guitar for me. But I was aware that I was watching when he'd be playing rhythm guitar. You know, instead of just playing G G G G G G G, you know, he'd be playing all these passing chords and all these inversions and this kind of thing. And it's one of the things I was very grateful to him for, because I was exposed to this when I was really quite young. I was about 17, and I remember just standing next to him on the stage one night, the first time I ever played with him, and you know, I'm just playing G G G G G G. Oh, what's the next one? G G, and so on. Yeah. And I'm watching him, and he's doing all this stuff, and I was thinking, what on earth's going on here? And I just remember just making it my business to learn that. Very, because I can't read. I've always been quite good at watching somebody play something and remembering the sound it made. So, you know, a certain finger position sounds a certain way. So I was able, when I got home, just to sort of sit there and just spend hours and hours and hours just working out these things. The great thing about them, of course, it means it doesn't matter what key you're in. It makes no difference. You know, you can play, you know, you know, Lady Be Good in G, or you can play T for 2 in A flat, and it doesn't make no difference at all. It completely, there's no difference whatever. So that's how I originally got involved with that, and I say it's been very, very useful thing to know, because it's over the years. This was since I was 17, and you know, next month I shall be 70. You know, I mean, how did that happen? But anyway, but I've always managed to be employed, you know, and I know it's not because I'm not the best guitar player by a long way, but I'm certainly one of the more versatile ones. I can play lots of different things in lots and lots of different styles quite authentically, and that means, of course, that if somebody wants a guitar player for, you know, a particular job, I've very often got the call, because I could, you know, if they want somebody who can, you know, play a bluegrass solo, and then they need somebody to play. You know, I don't know, Nightingale sang in Berkeley Square in E flat or something like that. I mean, I can do both things equally with equal facility, and so I think that's the, you know. So this is why I always say to the students, it doesn't really matter where your interest is. If somebody's really mad keen on flat picking, American style, fine. If they're really interested in playing swing jazz, they're not remotely interested in bluegrass. They just want to play Django tunes. That's fine. You know, but it's worth. For everybody, it's worth broadening your horizons as far as you can, just to learn, not necessarily a huge amount, but just to have a certain fundamental basis of all sorts of styles. And if you do that, it just makes, apart from anything else, it means I think it makes you a more interesting player, in the sense that, you know, I always liken it to having a big cooking pot, if you like, and you got riffs and licks and phrases and chord inversions and arpeggios and scales and all that. And you chuck them all into this big pot, and then you get a big pan, and you give them a shot, you stir them up around, and then you want to play a piece, you want to play a solo on a certain song or a certain tune. It could be any, it doesn't matter what the style is, or it could be a song or with a singer, or it could be you could be accompanying somebody playing a tune on a tenor saxophone. It doesn't matter. But you could just pull out the ingredients from that pot and just rearrange them in a certain way, and then hopefully you then create something which is your own. You know, none of us will ever be unique. Obviously, there's no such thing. There's only a certain. Yeah, we've all done. Everybody, you know, we all steal licks from everybody else. I mean, that's the name of the game. But hopefully, if you have this kind of idea of the cooking pot with all the ingredients in, you can actually create something which is perhaps a little bit different from the way that anybody else might do it. And then it just makes it interesting. You know, it makes it interesting for me as a player, because I just enjoy coming up with different ideas, and hopefully it makes it interesting for the listener, because they're hearing something which they perhaps hadn't heard before in quite the same way. And so that's why I always encourage people just to you know, I mean, for example, John Renbourn, who was a very good friend of mine, you know, died a few years ago, but he was a great fingerstyle player. He was really great player. And I got him to the university on a few occasions, and he'd be a guest teacher. And I had most of my students they're all mad keen flat pickers, and some of them were very, very good. I remember saying to them, you know, they were a little bit suspicious, because they thought, you know, Joel, who's this guy? He's a sort of fingerstyle player and does this sort of pseudo classical stuff. It's going to be. And I said, look, just forget all your prejudices. Just listen to this guy. He's a terrific player. He's a very nice man as well. He's very, very amusing. He's very funny. I said, but you know, just go in there with an open mind, and just if you come away from that 1 hour session with him, if you have 1 hour with him, if you come away with just one thing, you know, you can think, yeah, I remember that, and that's a certain way of playing a certain phrase or something, you know, it doesn't matter. And they all did. I mean, they all said afterwards, oh, what a fantastic guy, smashing bloke. And, you know, I never thought of doing it this way, or, you know, this kind of thing. And John was very funny. He said to me, one of my students, his name was Tom, he was a very, very fast flat picker. And I remember seeing John in the cafe at lunchtime, and he said to me, he said, here, I've just had one of your students called Tom. He said, I asked him to play me something. He said, he scared me to death. Because Tom's sitting there going, brrr, you know, because John never did, he just never played anything with the pick, you know. Which is really funny. But the whole point is that, you know, John, even at that stage, he was prepared to, he could learn something from Tom, and then from the student, and then the student learned something from him. So that's that kind of lovely relationship where everybody wins, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that yeah, the same is true here today with this little meeting, little interview that we did. I hope that everybody watching this, they can go away with maybe just one idea that that is important. And
You just
I
have,
would like to thank you, Chris, for doing this. And by the way, if you want to find out more about Chris' music, you can go to his website.
oldbridgemusic.com. Hang on a second, it's on the bottom of the sleeve here. Where
Yeah,
are we? That's, there we are, oldbridgemusic.com.
right. So, and you will find it in the description of the video. And
Yeah.
Chris, yeah, you have several albums out. Do you still have your guitar method that you?
Yeah, I do. It's still about. It shames me to say it, but it was 21 years ago I wrote that. 21.
It's about
It's about time I did another one, but we'll need another lockdown.
Yeah, I do have that book, and it's just a very, very nice book to have. So, yeah. So again, yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much, Chris, for
You're
this.
very, very welcome, Roberto, and thanks again for inviting me to Falcade. It was a fantastic week. I tell you the interesting thing, after eating all that wonderful food for 5 days, I
Uh-huh.
got home and I was at 1 kilo lighter. I couldn't believe it. I was terrified to stand on the scales. I was thinking, oh, it's gonna be like way up, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? It's actually lower. But there you go. It must have been all that walking I did in Venice, but still, anyway.
Okay, thank you very much, and ciao,
Great
ciao.
pleasure.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
See
Bye
you
bye.
next time. Bye bye.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell. And if you're looking for more guitar lessons, go to my website www.robertodallavecchia.com, or you can join my instructional channel on TrueFire. It's called Flatpicking Experience. Again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.